You put on underwear this morning. You did not think about it. It was the first thing you did, or close to the first, and it took approximately 4 seconds and 0 conscious deliberation. You own multiple pairs. You have a preferred brand, possibly a preferred fabric, possibly a strong opinion about the waistband. You would feel genuinely uncomfortable leaving the house without it. Now consider that for the first 200,000 years of human existence, nobody wore underwear. Not because they were unsophisticated, not because they did not care about comfort or hygiene, but because the entire concept did not exist. The garment that you put on this morning without a second thought, the one that is so fundamental to the modern experience of being dressed that its absence feels like a violation, had to be invented by someone at some point for a reason. And the reason is not what you think it is. It is not modesty, it is not sexuality, it is not social convention or religious doctrine or any of the forces we typically associate with the history of clothing. The oldest underwear ever found, a linen garment excavated from an Egyptian tomb, approximately 4,500 years old, was a utilitarian object, a practical solution to a specific physical problem, and the evidence from cultures across the ancient world suggests that the impulse to put something between the body and the outer layer of clothing emerged independently and repeatedly from the same set of functional needs. This is the story of why ancient humans started wearing underwear, and it tells us something surprisingly interesting about the relationship between the human body, physical labor, and the invention of comfort. The first problem underwear solved was friction. Before agriculture, before permanent settlements, ancient humans moved constantly. Hunting required covering large distances on foot, often carrying heavy loads, often through terrain that demanded sustained physical effort across hours and days. The outer garments available, animal hides, rough plant fibers, woven grasses, were effective at managing temperature and weather. They were not designed with sustained movement in mind. Chafing is not a minor inconvenience when you are walking 15 miles a day across rough ground. It is a serious physical problem that produces open wounds, which, in a world without antibiotics, produce infections, which kill people. The management of skin integrity during sustained physical activity was a genuine survival concern for hunter-gatherers in a way that is difficult for sedentary modern people to fully appreciate. The solution, arrived at independently across multiple cultures, was to place a softer layer directly against the skin, not to cover the body. The outer garment did that, but to create a buffer between the skin and the friction surface, to manage the specific problem that movement creates at the points where fabric meets skin most continuously. Archaeological evidence from Ice Age sites in Europe includes bone needles fine enough to produce tightly woven fabric significantly softer and closely fitted than the outer garments of the same period. Researchers interpret some of this material as evidence of underlayers worn against the skin for functional rather than decorative purposes. The linen garment found in the Egyptian tomb confirms the pattern. Linen was valued in ancient Egypt precisely because it was the softest fabric available, cooler, smoother, and less abrasive than wool or animal hide. The garment was not decorative, it was functional. It was the solution to a body-in-motion problem. The second problem underwear solved was temperature, and specifically the management of temperature at the parts of the body where temperature dysregulation is most consequential. Cold weather clothing in the ancient world was primarily designed to manage core temperature, to keep the torso and major organs warm enough to sustain function. The extremities, hands, feet, face, were addressed through additional garments, but there was a gap. The inner thigh, the groin, and the lower abdomen are areas where the body loses heat disproportionately relative to surface area, and where sustained cold exposure produces discomfort and eventually dysfunction. Archaeological evidence from cold climate populations in Central Asia, dating to approximately 3,000 years ago, includes trousers with a fitted inner layer, essentially leggings worn beneath the outer garment, that appear to have been specifically designed for warmth management during sustained outdoor activity. The Ötzi the Iceman mummy found preserved in the Alps and dating to approximately 5,300 years ago was wearing a layered system of garments that included a close-fitting inner layer beneath his outer coat, consistent with a deliberate insulation strategy. The pattern is consistent across cold climate cultures that had no contact with each other. Wherever humans had to sustain physical activity in cold conditions, a fitted underlayer appeared as part of the clothing system, not because of convention, because the body required it. Warmth and friction management were the two original functions. Everything else, modesty, status signaling, fashion, came later, much later. The story becomes more interesting when ancient humans started living in cities, because cities introduced a new set of problems that underwear had to solve, and a new set of meanings that underwear began to carry. In ancient Rome, a garment called the subligacalum, essentially a loincloth worn beneath the toga, was standard across all social classes. Soldiers wore it for the same functional reasons as prehistoric hunters: sustained movement, friction management, temperature regulation during campaigns. But Roman civilians wore it too, and the subligacalum began to carry social information that had nothing to do with its original function. The material it was made from indicated wealth. The condition it was kept in indicated personal hygiene standards, which in turn indicated social class. The manner in which it was worn, visible above the toga, completely concealed, or somewhere between, communicated information about the wearer's relationship to social convention. A garment that had begun as a practical solution to a friction problem had become, within a few thousand years, a social signal, a marker of identity, an object with meaning that went far beyond its mechanical function. This transformation is not unique to underwear. It happens to almost every piece of clothing that began as a purely functional object. But underwear follows the pattern with particular clarity because its functional origins are so straightforward and its subsequent cultural complexity is so elaborate. The garment you put on this morning without thinking about it has been, at various points in human history, a survival tool, a status marker, a religious object, a medical device, a political statement, and a fashion item, usually several of these simultaneously. There is a version of the history of clothing that positions underwear as a product of civilization, as something that emerged from modesty norms, religious injunctions about the body, or the social conventions of complex societies. That version gets the order wrong. The evidence points consistently to function first. Ancient humans started wearing underlayers because they were moving through difficult terrain in rough garments and their skin was paying the price. Because they were spending days in cold conditions and needed insulation at specific points on the body. Because the physical demands of their lives created specific problems that a layer of softer material against the skin could solve. The cultural meanings came afterward. They always do. Humans are extraordinarily good at taking objects that exist for practical reasons and loading them with social, symbolic, and emotional significance. We have been doing it since the first person wore a bear tooth around their neck, not because it kept them warm, but because of what it said about who they were. But the bear tooth started as a tooth, and the underwear started as a solution to a friction problem. The garment you put on this morning is approximately 5,000 years old in its current conceptual form. The impulse it represents, the impulse to put something soft between your skin and the harder world outside, is considerably older than that. It is as old as the first human who spent a day walking long distances in rough clothing and noticed, with great specificity, which parts of their body hurt by the end of it, and did something about it.